There it is. Okay, hello. Okay. Um, thank God, here we are to continue our explorations in the Haggadah. I just want to point out that I know that we're in Bein HaMetzarim now. You know, it's like we're in the period between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, which has the name Bein HaMetzarim and has its own orientation, which I'm not going to be relating directly to at all because we're really deep in the Haggadah for its own sake. But I do want to point out that everything we say about leaving Egypt is relevant because the period Bein HaMitzarim, which literally means between the narrow straits, is actually also Bein Mitzrayim. It's the same word Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, meaning that in a sense, even though we left Egypt at Pesach, whatever happens that has to do with galut, that has to do with exile, that has to do with destruction, that has to do with a restraining of our life force in a way in which it can come to full fruition, that's Mitzrayim. That's just what it is. And that's important to recognize that here we are, like in this period before the destruction of the temple, when the walls were shattered. Um, and the question really became, can we maintain who we are? So, yeah, so that is described as Bein HaMitzarim from a verse in Lamentations and Echa, that we were caught between the Mitzarim, but you can't not see that that very same word Mitzarim, which means narrow straits, is also the same word of Mitzrayim, which is Egypt. Because anytime we're dealing with, as I put it now, this restraining of the life force, so we're dealing with some type of a servitude, some type of a slavery, right, on some level, right? So whether it be a slavery which is imposed by an outside totalitarian ruler like Paro, or whether it's a slavery that's imposed by our own inner constraints that are misplaced, it's the same issue. And whether it's actually imposed by the fact that we lost something, which was our avenue for our highest accomplishment and realization, which is the temple, all right, and the Beit Mikdash. It's all about the same kind of a story, with obviously distinctions and delineations, which is beyond what this year is about. But sometime perhaps we want to regather to talk about the framework of the year and see how these interplays work and how they're different. But nevertheless, that is the same word certainly means something. So let's just leave it at that. Yeah. So some chomer lemachshava, as it's called in Hebrew, a little bit of material to think about. We had we had quite an astounding realization last time, and remind me if again, I'm sorry because I teach in various places that we actually got up to this, but I do remember it being here that we saw that even though the person telling the story when he brings the first fruits tells a story of us calling out to God, the verse doesn't actually say we called out to God. Do you remember this? The verse actually says that we called out from the burden of the servitude, from the burden of the slavery. Is this familiar to you? That like we made that distinction? Yes. Okay. In other words, what we pointed out is that actually the verses in Exodus and Shemot don't talk about the Jewish people calling out to God. They just talk about them calling out. And they begin to call out when the old king of Egypt dies. And then they groaned and called out. Right? Remember this? We're on the right page? Yeah. So that is actually kind of a strange sort of non sequitur because the king of Egypt died and they groaned. I don't know. The king of Egypt died. I don't know if he was a despot over me. I would have expected people to celebrate, right? So the rabbis go a certain direction and they say he made the afflictions even harsher. That's what it means that there was that he died. He actually began to tend towards death because he got a very bad disease, leprosy, and then he did this horrific thing of killing Jewish babies for their blood. you know, to use that to heal himself. They got some advice, some holistic healer, I guess, or something. I don't know if that's going to work. But in the end, it was terrible suffering, and then they groaned. But this, I didn't go that direction, and I don't think you need to. And I later saw that they're rare, but some early interpreters who interpret the way I suggested, and that is that when the king of Egypt died, hope opened up for them. They suddenly realized it doesn't have to stay this way. It doesn't have to stay this way. They've been there for 200 years. You got to understand this. They've been there for 200 years. And apparently it was like the same king the whole time. You know what I mean? It's like, or something like that. But when he dies, maybe less at this point than 200 years, whatever it is, it's like when he dies, it's like, it's like what they call the glass ceiling shattered, like something new became possible, highly relevant to us in this period. The walls got broken, the tablets got broken, which is a terrible disaster on the one hand. On the other hand, it opens up a new possibility. It just does. That's the way life works. It opens up a new possibility when things break. Important to know that, and important to know that even when the walls around Jerusalem break. So on the one hand, it's mournful. On the other hand, how does Leonard Cohen say it? It's like the crack in the wall lets the light in, something like that. Okay, so so here, when there's the crack in the wall, namely that Paro dies, they suddenly noticed what really hurts them, not the physical pain. That probably is something they'd been complaining about for a while. They may have even been praying about it. I don't know. We don't know because there's no mention of them for the first two chapters of Exodus, for the first two chapters of Shemot. But then it says, in those many, 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 many days, those long days, the king of Egypt died, right? And they groaned because of the servitude, because of the slavery. They groaned because of the slavery. That's so important. They didn't groan because of the pain. They've probably been groaning about that a long time, but that's not a reason to set them free. The only reason to set them free is because they want freedom. You see, if you set someone free who has not yet developed psychologically enough to want freedom, so you set them free, what are they going to? They're not going to be free. They'll find something else to enslave themselves to because they have not matured to the point where enslavement is anathema to the nature of their being. But when Paro died and they saw we could be free, there could be a different world. We don't have to stay here complaining about the pain. We could actually become a different type of person, a person it's a shift. It's not a different type of person when you stop having pain. It's a different type of person when you desire your liberty, right? And the verse is very careful, right? If you notice, this is where we are right now, right? It says, "Vayenchu b'nei Israel min ha'avodah." They groaned under the servitude, vayizaku, and they cried out, not to anyone in particular. And I think I explained a little of that last time, and I want to get back to it. Vatal shavatam el Elohim, and then their voices and their cry went up to God. Min ha'avodah, and the verse repeats again that what went up to God was that they were crying out from the weight of the servitude, from the weight of the enslavement. Look at that verse. It's an amazing verse. We've been talking so much about how they put tax collectors over them, and they were beating them, and they were telling them build this, and they were giving them meaningless work that had no hope of realization in this world, right? I mean, they were doing everything they could to break their spirit, including a lot of pain. God didn't look at that. I mean, he may have like here and there helped someone out, but that's not a reason to liberate a people. The only reason to liberate a people is that the people desires liberty, because then that means that when they are released from the despot, they will seek the full realization of their being, the full realization of their purpose, because that's what is denied you when you're a servant, right? Okay? Super important. And here's my claim: they don't even turn to God. Even to turn to God, and this is a radical claim, but it's what the verse says, even to turn to God would have been a risk of them seeking to pass their freedom from being in the hands of a human despot to passing their freedom over to a divine despot. We need security, right? He's dead. We don't have that security anymore. One possibility could have been if they had cried out to God, God would have seen, oh, Pharaoh died. They've lost the security of that strong ruler. Now they're looking for another strong ruler. I'll show them that I'm stronger than he is, and I'll bring a bunch of plagues. And then they'll be my servile servants. No, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what God's looking for. What he's looking for is people whose aspiration is for the flourishing of life, for the affirmation of life, right? As we've been seeing all along, for the fulfillment of life. And that requires that it's enough for me just to see that you've had it with this. You've had it with this life of servitude. I like it, so to speak. I can hear God saying, I like it that you didn't call out to me, that you just called out. Oh, this is life. This is not life. This is not life. Great. That's the people I want. And here's my proof. Because it says in the next verse, and now here we are in the next verse, that what happened was that God heard our voices. He heard our voices, right? He heard our voices. As it says, and here we're going to the next verse, as it says, Vayishma Elohim et na'akatam, that God heard their cry, their groan, their cries. Question what that word na'akatam means. Vayizkor Elohim et brito et Abraham et Yitzchak et Yaakov. And God remembered his brit, his covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Here's my claim. I remember them. I remember them, especially Abraham. Especially Abraham. Abraham started walking towards the land of Canaan at the end of Parshat Noach. Even before I talked to him about it, he was on his way. He's a person of autonomy, of agency. I remember Abraham. He set out to seek me before I even spoke with him. He broke down all of the enslaving, imprisoning idols that his world lived according to, and said, you got the wrong idea about what reality is. Reality is not a bunch of different forces that are holding everything in place like this stone statue is. Reality is not some nature that is the givens. There's a higher reality, which is the awareness and consciousness, which is forever renewing and creating all out of one. You have to understand this is an extraordinary revolution. It's almost like the revolution of quantum physics against materialistic physics, really, because in materialistic physics, everything is just kind of like predestined, predetermined, and it's true that it's governed by a singular kind of a force or a singular kind of set of rules, but nevertheless, there's no real unitary mind behind it all. And then you go into like a world in which anything can happen, man. Like the possibilities are open. That actually brings us closer to the divine in that way. And it's very hard for the materialistic physicists to adjust to this switch, because that switch actually takes physics closer to the direction of the nature of our own consciousness, which is forever renewing. It's chaotic, it's associative, it's all kinds of things going on, right? That don't seem to follow any set rules. Well, if you're a materialist, you don't like that. But if you're a consciousness, then you love that, because that's your experience of life, is that Life is exploring, renewing, changing, right? I mean, that's a whole different world. So in the same way, right? It's not precisely parallel, although I could actually make it more parallel, but that would be beyond right now our subject. But the point is, Avram was a tremendous revolutionary, and he was the first fighter for freedom. He wasn't fighter for a religion. He wasn't trying to get people to serve God. And if you read Maimonides carefully, Maimonides says, or the Rambam says in his laws of Avodah Zarah, he says, and he taught people a way of service so they would come to know God and that there's one God. He didn't teach them a way of service in order that they serve God. That's a later stage. I'll tell you why. He taught them service so that they would keep their minds on God. That's a different thing. But what he wanted is that they would have their minds on God. And the reason he wants their minds on God is not for religious reasons. It's because when your mind is on the source, then you're seeking the free will that stands beneath all. And then you start to think about yourself and what is my free will beneath it all? That is the unique contribution that I will make that's different than the laws of nature. They intertwine to come to know an infinite God who's forever giving and creating, and to come to know yourself and appreciate yourself as having that same potentiality. But if you just go for, so to speak, a religious God, where all I'm supposed to do is turn myself over and be his servant, so then you won't discover your personal agency and autonomy. And then you'll actually be undoing the purpose of creation, which is to reflect this divine creative power. So then it's all about my creativity. No, it's about your creativity in the service of the higher vision. I'm not saying you're not in service of God. You are in service of God. You're in service of the higher vision, of the vision of the Creator. But in order to be truly in service of that, you have to be creative, to be like Him, and not just follow the rules. On the other hand, you have to follow the rules because otherwise you'll be completely disconnected from Him, because He designed a certain universe with particular boundary conditions. So we're not just talking about going into some hallucinated, illusionary world, right? So it's a beautiful balance. But if all they had complained about was that this hurts, get me out of here, then they would have said, "Oh, thank you. We are forever beholden to you. Tell us what to do so we can pay off our debt." I didn't create a world for that. I created a world to release people to their full realization, and that requires that they be creative and draw on the resources that are their own, and to dedicate that to the higher unity, to the higher value of whatever you're going to say, of love, of peace, of interconnectedness, of design, of affirmation, of care, wherever you're going to go with the embedded values in creation. And I leave it up to you in a way to creatively design how you're going to go about that, but stay within certain boundaries that I'm defining for you. Okay, my mitzvot and my prohibitions, etc. But those are the boundary conditions of life. Those are not the purpose of life. You never find in the Torah that the purpose of life is to keep mitzvot. The purpose of life is to live. It's literally what Moses says in chapter 32 of Deuteronomy. The purpose of life is to live. So, yeah, I mean, the mitzvot will add to your life, will actually make it possible for you to fully live, but never confuse the two. That I'm fully living if I'm keeping the mitzvot. No, you're not. Okay, so this is super important, that God is remembering the covenant He made with Abraham. He saw this man. He saw Yitzchak as the inheritor of this vision. He saw Yaakov, each with their own particular aspect. Abraham in just like this wide open search for the source of all. Yitzchak for seeking the way of service of this all. And Yaakov for seeking a way to bind it together among his family and ultimately all peoples, as ultimately all peoples will be saying, as Yeshayahu says, let us go up together to the house of Yaakov. Literally what the prophet says. What do you mean the house of Yaakov? What about the house of Abraham? What about, no, it's the house of Yaakov, because he's the one who kept in mind always the interconnectedness of all of humanity. It came out in a minuscule form in the interconnectedness of his family, but the broad vision of Yaakov is clearly the interconnectedness of all of humanity. I remembered these three, God says. I remembered the covenant with them. The covenant means there's someone to talk to. There's someone there who's for real. There's someone who's not just looking to be a sycophant for me, to be servile to me. There's someone who's in a live relationship with me, and covenant is always alive. Okay, covenant is always alive. And I said before, Judaism is like very body and spirit. So covenant, I mean, you all know where the covenant of the flesh is on a man. It's on something which, in order for there to be sexual interaction, there needs to be like alive. There's something that's alive. There's something electric that's going on between these two people. That's just the way it is. Why did that become the symbol of the covenant? Because a covenant is always alive, right? You can put that aside if you want, if it makes you uncomfortable, but the point is that's alive. The Ramban, one of our great interpreters, says the root of the word brit is bria, bria. The bet resh, right? The bet resh in brit is the same bet resh in Bereshit. It's actually the same word, brit, but in the middle there's aish, which is fire, passion. Something else, huh? Well, that's creation. That's the truth of what creation is. Creation is itself a covenant of fire, a covenant of passion. Okay? So, a covenant of passion requires people who are passionate. Passionate about what? About creation. What does that mean about creation? About loving animals and cats and hugging trees? No, passionate about creation, passionate about being creative. You get that? So that's what he sees. Abraham's very name, Abraham's very name has that bet resh in it, but it's actually an anagram of Bihi Baram, which means in their creativity. That's a medrash. The rabbis say that. In their creativity. I have a brit with these people, dedicated to creativity, dedicated to that creativity being in the service of Yitzchak, dedicated to that creativity and that service being something which serves all humanity and binds them together. It's an incredible vision. And God remembers it when he sees them groaning, not under the weight of the suffering, but under the weight of servitude. Now I'm ready to listen to you. You people have been groaning a long time. I'm sure they've been groaning for many, many, many years. It's been tough, right? It's been tough. What happened? The king of Egypt died, and they realized it doesn't have to stay this way. It's really a vision for all of us, because all of us have, I would say, station ways in our lives when our little pharaohs die. We all have a little pharaoh in there or out there, and like sometimes you have like a whole belief system. I work with people on this all the time. You have a whole belief system that developed because of something that happened to you in your childhood, say. Like your parents didn't listen to you when you'd come home and tell about what happened in school, right? And then you develop this belief that's like, I'm nothing. That's where a child goes. I'm nothing. Because he can't say my parents nothing. So he says, I'm nothing. And then he develops this belief, I'm nothing. But it could be, I'm something, just my parents are distracted. My parents didn't get attention when they were kids. My parents are overwhelmed with, too many economic issues. There are many, many alternatives to the conclusion of I'm nothing. It's like, it's not and when you see that, and that, then the old Pharaoh, which is in that case, this belief system you have of I'm nothing, suddenly he dies. I've done this dozens of times with people. It's like, suddenly he dies. that old Pharaoh dies. And I'm like, wow, I don't know where I'm going yet, but I know I was just released from something that was holding me back from being me. We all have that little Pharaoh inside. And we all do the work all the time and ought to do the work. You're doing the work anyway. Life, if you're not doing the work, then life will force you to do the work and send you other little external pharaohs that are actually simply manifestations of your internal pharaoh, which is apparently also what's going on here. Look at the Jewish people. What's going on? They went down because it was a famine. And they said, we're just coming down to sojourn. And then all of a sudden they're like populating and they're making a great place for themselves. And then the Egyptians are like, they're actually going to try and fight against us. The Egyptians are saying, what? Tell them to go home. Everyone is locked into a conception, right? And so then in being locked in that conception and the Jewish people being locked in a misconception of what is their place, they should have gone back home to Canaan after the famine ended, right? So everyone gets locked into these narrow straits. And then something happens. Something happens in your life. Someone comes along and says something. It might just be an offhand comment. Or something, lo aleinu, disastrous happens. Or if you're lucky, you have a dream. Right? Something happens that's sent to shake you up, to get you out of the paro that's enslaving you. It's just God's driving you forward. And the amazing thing about the word paro, right? The word paro itself comes from the same Hebrew word of lahafriya. Lahafriya means to bother, to separate, to block. Right? So that everything's in a closed system of what's called piraon, tit for tat all the time. There's no way out of it. So it's important for us to see this, and then what we want to do is reconnect to that courage of Abraham, that exactitude of Yitzchak, and that broadness of Yaakov. That's God remembering oh my gosh, I remember once there were these three people, and these are their descendants. But as long as they were just biological descendants, they hadn't gone through the process. But now that they've become spiritual heirs to those forefathers, I'm ready to get things going. Okay? Got that? Yeah, now we're ready. Vayishmat kolenu. So here we are, again, just to put this back into context, here we are listening to the person who's bringing the first fruits of the land of Israel after it's been inherited. Remember back in the day, right? And it began with Arami Oved Avi, Vayerd Mitzrayma, Vayagosham Imte Ma'at, Vayisham Legoy Gadol, Atzum Varav, Vayareu Otano Mitzrim. Remember that the Egyptians were evil to us, not because of the hard work they put upon us, but because they were duplicitous, because they were keeping us at a distance from knowing what the heck we're doing. Why are we doing this? Just keep doing it. They're doing it to get us to stop loving life and to give up on having children, right? But they're telling us they're doing it because we need you to be patriotic to the country. That's evil. Be upfront. Let us know what this is. That's itself an exile within an exile, where you don't know what the heck you're doing, and you're building these buildings and they keep just getting sunken into the ground. Everything you try to do in the world becomes ashes. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I've been investing in this for 3 years, and then it's just gone. I mean, there's something extremely alienating about that. Like, my life energies have been invested in something which just keeps getting taken away, right? The Egyptians are working on us becoming mufra'im, becoming separated from ourselves, paro, becoming separated ourselves so that we will no longer have that most basal in love and affirmation of life, which is the essence of what a human being is, right? In the image of God. And they're seeking to take it away from us by giving us alienating work. We've talked a great deal about that, right? Okay, so now the people says, I'm not willing to be a servant anymore. And then God hears and he remembers Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's where we are in the speech of the person bringing these first fruits. And he says, Vayishma Hashem et kolenu, God heard our voices. Let's just get the verse down. Vayaret onyenu, and he saw our impoverishment, our affliction. It's a word that we're going to need to work on, but let's just keep it now. He saw our affliction. Vet amalenu, he saw our labor. Don't know what that means yet. Vet lachatzein, and he saw the pressure. He saw the pressure. All right, I mean, he saw these three things. Like, what's going on here, right? What's going on here? Well, that's interesting that he saw three things because we just talked about him remembering the three fathers. Maybe, Vayaret onyenu, he saw the affliction, I don't know, has something to do with Abraham. He saw the labor, something to do with Yitzchak. Oh, yeah, actually, Yitzchak is about service and labor. He saw the pressure. I don't know exactly what the pressure is, but there's pressure. Maybe that has something to do with Yaakov. Keep that in mind, okay? Because these triads in the Chumash are extremely precise, okay? Now, it just sounds like what he heard was our voices, and he saw how hard it was for us, right? That's what it sounds like. I mean, if that's what it meant, then he probably could have just said it in one word, Vayar et sivlenu. He saw our suffering. If that's what all wanted to say, then it would have just said that. But it's divided into three different aspects, right? And yeah, he did remember the brit with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Interesting, kind of a connection here, right? So let's see what the Haggadah does with these three words. Okay, it's going to be extremely telling. It's going to be extraordinary, really, actually. Are we good? Okay, so let's go. Let's see. Again, now this word is a word which actually we've seen various times. I'm going to erase this now. Has everyone there? So we've seen this word. Onyenu is a super important word in in this story, because if you remember, at the very beginning it says when God talks to Abraham, he says to him, "Yadoa teda ki ger yazaracha be'eretz lo lahem, vavadum v'inu otam." So God says from the very beginning, they're going to be afflicted. They're not just going to be in service. They're going to be afflicted. Okay, important word right at the very outset. And then it says, "Kasher ya'anu oto," as much as they afflict them, they became even more and more numerous. It says, right? And then, just for the fun of it, we end up eating on the Seder night matzah, which is called in Hebrew, which is called in Parshat Re'eh, in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, lechem oni. That's interesting. So you have onyenu, you have lechem oni, you have ve'inu, you have kasher ya'anu. Okay, I mean, something's going on here, right? Something's going on that is a theme that is threaded through both the prophecy of them being enslaved and the actual enslavement, and somehow the way we come out of the enslavement with lechem oni. And this is the most important thing right now, is God saw it. God saw it. God saw it. This oni. So again, if we were just talking about like physical suffering and like the complaining and the pain and the pathos and the compassion, etc., so then Onyenu we would take a verse where the Egyptians are beating up the Jews, right? Beating up the Israelites, right? I guess that's what the affliction is. No. Zo prishut derech eretz. The Haggadah says this is because this comes by virtue of the men and women were not able to sleep together. Huh? Where'd that come from? Right? Something about their sexual lives was prohibited to them or truncated. Something's going on there. How the heck did that become onye? How that's the affliction? I mean, I imagine people whipping, you know, that was the affliction. Okay, the men and women were unable to be fully together. Now, derech eretz, right? Derech eretz is usually taken as like, it's a euphemism. We all know what it's talking about, right? It's like that's derech eretz, and in fact, the daughters of Lot, when they have relations with Lot, in that somewhat unseemly scene, so they say, you know, there's no one to come upon us, there's no one to have relations with us, kederech kol haaretz, which is the way of the land. Okay, so it sounds like, I guess it's just a euphemism. Okay, we all know what we're talking about. Wink, wink, right? But it's actually far deeper than that. Far, far deeper than that. And let me introduce you to something, right? It's called Mishnah in Kiddushin, a Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechet, in the beginning of the tractate in the Talmud, which talks about marriage. And you know what the first thing it says? Haisha nikneit b'shalosh drachim. A woman is acquired more deeply. A woman becomes a nest for the home in three different ways. In three different ways. In three different ways. Either it could be with a ring, money, or it could be with a document which says he says, writes to her, "You're my wife," or it could be with bia, with intercourse. Those are the three ways the woman becomes the wife of a man, when it's done, obviously, in the context of becoming married, not just hanging around. Okay, right? So the Talmud says, why are these called pathways? Why are these called pathways? It's like money isn't a pathway. A document's not a pathway, it's a thing. It should have said a woman is bought or acquired or becomes the nest using three different things, right? Three different things. So the Talmud says, well, because of bia, right? I'm just going to call it in Hebrew, it's intercourse, right? Because of bia, bia is actually the ultimate point of their relationship, right? And many, many different levels of that. And therefore, and bia is called a derech. Bia is a derech. So it's true, a ring's not a derech, it's a davar, but since we wanted to really emphasize the interconnection between them, the physical interconnection between them, and on all levels, the interconnection between them. So we didn't want to use the word davar, an object, because what's happening actually between them is they're setting out on a path together. A path is far more dynamic than an object. A far deeper representation of what's between this couple is that they are joined on a journey. They're joined by that journey. That journey actually makes them join. It really works all those ways. It really does. I mean, here I am, 40 years into the journey. 40 years. You can say mazel tov. It's like, it's a journey. And I bless all of you with like sticking it out and, getting it and sticking it through. It's like the journey itself forms the unity, just as the unity is participant in a journey. It's like, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You wouldn't want to call it anything else than a derech. Don't worry, girls, it's going to happen. Right? You wouldn't want to call it anything else. You wouldn't want to call it an object. That would be objectification. Relationship is never an object. It's always alive. Okay? The land is alive. How do you make the land into a journey? Derech eretz. The journey of the land. The journey of the land is into relationships. That's the journey of the land. You get it? So the journey of the land is not a euphemism for sex. The journey of the land is a depiction of the nature of life, which is that the earth gives forth the possibility for relationship, for interconnection, for interpenetrating realities, right? Wow. And that's what they were losing. They missed that. They didn't have that. Why didn't they have that? Why didn't they have that? They were impoverished. Onyenu means impoverished, like an ani. Onyenu means impoverished. They were missing that, right? The deepest impoverishment is the inability to interrelate yourself with another. That's the deepest impoverishment. The rabbis actually say that. They say that someone who can't talk and can't hear, I mean, it really is a sad world. As much as we try to overcome that disability, right? Nevertheless, that's a very, very painful thing in the eyes of the rabbis. Like that ability to speak, to interconnect, to see the other person. All those things that our senses are oriented towards. But the point is that newness, creativity. Let's go back to that creativity, affirmation of life, and its unfolding always involves another. It just does. Okay, it could be another in many ways. It could be another who's a teacher. It could be another who's a wife or spouse. It could be another who's a friend. It always involves another. In Jewish thinking, it always involves another. I mean, that's just the way God built the world. I mean, He could have just had things cloning themselves, couldn't He? I mean, why couldn't things just clone themselves? Why couldn't flowers just reproduce from within themselves? Why couldn't human beings just do that? You have the egg, produce your own sperm. Like, what's the deal? Why is it all sexual? It is because it's not about the sexual, it's about the interpenetrating of all, which is the mode which God created for the unfurling of something new, which is itself the product of a joinder with another. It's not that you can't be creative from within your own head, although there's questions about that. But let's say you never heard anything, you grew up in a vat of liquid, exactly body temperature your entire life. I mean, well, imagine that. That's like torture. But and you became very creative there. Probably not. Like, and if you do, it would be complete hallucinating, right? It's like there needs to be interaction, even if it's just on the level of your senses. Okay. So this is the way the world is actually created. And it has to do with what God was looking to be creative about and having interaction with a creation. So that his type of creativity and creation would become a type of interaction, right? A type of interaction. Where everything is on a journey together, always unfolding, always fresh, always fresh. It's new. Here I am going away with my wife for a day in the desert, 40 years into marriage, and looking forward to it. Because I know there's going to be new things that are going to happen. It's like, because we'll be able to sit down and talk, that's all. And like it'll be something new, right? And a different stage of things by virtue of stopping along the way and interacting in a authentic and heartfelt way. Okay? That's derech eretz. That's derech eretz. They were denied that. They were denied that. They were impoverished with the greatest impoverishment that is in a creation that is designed to be on a path. It's a derech. And the first place that the derech was introduced in the Bible is when God sent them out of the garden and he set up two cherubs, two kruvim, to guard the derech, Eitz HaChaim, the path towards the tree of life, or the path of the living tree. Lishmor et derech Eitz HaChaim. It doesn't say to guard over. Lishmor al derech Eitz HaChaim. Lishmor et derech Eitz HaChaim. Two kruvim in relationship with each other. Standing there, the very word kruv, meaning, we've talked about this before, complexity. They're complex. They're not simple. They're not two pshutim. They're two kruvim, morkavim, in Hebrew, morkav, which creates movement. A merkava is a chariot. It's getting interesting here. And they are taking care of the path. Why do you need two? Because it's about the interconnection. That's the path. And is it on your way to the tree of life? No, that's the tree of life. Of course it is. And when you are a slave, you cannot have that. You can only have that as a free human being. You can only have that if you are authentic and real to what is autonomously um, welling up in you, and that is what you share. But if you're enslaved to some stupid little pharaoh inside, I'm not worth it. I'm disgusting. Ooh, if she ever gets to know me, she's going to hate me because I'm hateful, or the myriad little pharaohs inside. Or you're so beaten down with work on the outside, but not work that's productive work, work that's unproductive work, where you don't even have a relationship with the work you're doing because everything you do just gets swallowed up by the ground. And everything you do, you're just doing because someone told you to do it, but not because you really believe in it. So you're alienated from the product of what you are producing. You become alienated from yourself. So what am I? I'm just a commodity. I'm just something that someone lords himself over and gets something out of, but I'm nothing. You see how slavery on two levels. One, I can't be authentic. Two, I can't even be in touch with myself. So of course there's no derech eretz. They may have been reproducing. After all, it says, the verse actually says, Kasher ya'anu oto, ken yirbev v'chen yifrotz. As much as as much as the people, the Egyptians, afflicted them, ya'anu oto, they got more and more numerous. So it sounds like Inui isn't holding them back from reproducing. Inui is holding them back from it being derech eretz. You can reproduce fine. Come home tired after a long day, completely alienated from yourself, completely without any sense of your personhood. You can't have sex. You can have sex. You'll have children. That's not the point. The point isn't the reproduction. The point is this, and here's a play on words, which we once explored, is this inui, what you're doing, or is this ona? Same word in Hebrew, ona, which is when a couple meets at a special time of love. It's called ona. Oh my gosh, what is that word doing in this list? What? How did that get there? That's when they actually live together. Yeah, because special time can be special time dedicated and devoted with a full presence of self. Or time can be, we better get it done now because if we don't, we're not going to have another chance for another couple of weeks. That's when it's an inui. But the same thing of like time, it's limited in time, can become the greatest origin of the intimacy, or it can become the greatest destruction of the possibility of intimacy. Could you not deal with the phone over there? You, thank you. So the two possibilities here are embedded in the very word onyein. You get it? And so the rabbis understand, that Haggadah understands, this must be what we're talking about. Can they really be together in intimacy, or is that being denied them in the greatest impoverishment of creation? And you're going to see, I'm going to prove this to you in another couple of minutes also, even more. That's why they call it Zoprishut Derech Eretz, okay? It's a pre-shoot, it's a separating from journey, the land journey, the journey of the land, right? And just becomes the physical act, devoid of selfhood, of love, of interconnectivity, etc. And look what the rabbis, it's unbelievable. They say, well, we know that this is what it's talking about. You know how we know it's talking about? Kamash and Emar, because of the following verse. And I challenge you to understand what this verse has to do with anything. As it says, Vayar Elohim et bnei Yisrael, that God saw the Israelites, Vayeda Elohim, and he knew. And he knew what? And he knew. He knew. He knew. What? He knew. Okay. I guess that's Prishut Derech Eretz, huh? I guess that's that they were not being together. So on one simple level, right, it's taught that because he knew, meaning that it took a knowing, he couldn't just see it, he actually had to know something that was going on in private. I don't think that's a very promising interpretation. Because Vayeda Elohim, listen to this is really, really deep and important. The very first time that the word Vayeda is used in the Torah is Adam Yada et Chava Ishto. That man knew his wife, Chava, right? Very back, way back, way back. First time when knowledge is used, right, is for that sexual interconnection between Adam and Chava and his wife. Vayeda Elohim means that God knows. God knows. God knows. What exactly are you saying, Rav Daniel? God knows. Well, if it says that God knows, then that, to me, the Haggadah says, is indication that what he's knowing is that there is no knowing. I'm glad you're awake. What he's knowing is that there is no knowing. I'll tell you what I mean by that. What he's knowing is that their being together is no longer a knowing. I'll get a little deeper with that, right? Of course, copulation can just be the physical interconnectivity. When does it become knowing? Why does the Torah call it knowing? And Adam knew his wife because it's the physical must be a materialization of something far deeper than that physical, but which nevertheless it represents. It represents a penetration. When I talk to you, right? Excuse, but this is just the way it is. This is why Judaism is okay. If you're not going to be holistic about it, then find another religion. It's the interpenetration, right? And the penetration, and like you talk to me, there's intercourse, there's interaction. Okay, when a man and a wife are in love with each other, the greater they're knowing each other, the greater their love becomes. This Maimonides says, the Rambam says, the greater they're knowing, the greater they're loving, and the greater they're loving, the greater they will desire to know. That's the interchange. Maimonides says this, the Rambam. And he says, the only reason I'm teaching you so many things that I teach you, he says, is so that you'll love more. He literally says this, so that you will love more. Okay? That's when you are knowing. So when the physical becomes itself participant in the knowing, in the interconnection between us, in the joinder that's far beyond skin deep, then you're in the Garden of Eden, man. Then you're in the Gan Eden with Adam and Chava before they ate from the tree of knowing good and evil. Knowing good and evil is small time knowing. Knowing good and evil is like more moral knowing. It's not true, deep consciousness and awareness. Okay? You get this? This is like so crucial. You see how, it's just an amazing, amazing way that the Haggadah took, he saw our affliction and turned it in. He saw our impoverishment from the greatest wealth that creation offers us, which is this possibility of a creative participation. And he saw and he knew. And here's a deep thought about the nature of divine unity. He knew because his knowing and our knowing are in unity with each other. The Rambam actually says this, right? Our knowing and his knowing are not two different realities. His way of thinking, as the prophet says, "Machshavotai lo machshavotechem," my way of thinking is not your way of thinking. I get that. I can't think as much as God thinks and as broad as God thinks. But I can know in a way which is similar to his knowing, because, as the Rambam says, he is awareness itself. And so, in as much as you are aware, you are in touch with him. Now, if that awareness is of other, what's the deepest awareness of other? Wherever you're going to go with that, it will include, if you're a human being, it will include the physical. God saw that they were together, but it was lacking knowing. How did he know? Because he knows. Because he knows. So when we don't know, he knows that we don't know because he doesn't know in the fullness of his knowing. Because his knowing actually travels through us and our knowing. And so he knew. What did he know? He knew that when they were together, it wasn't derech eretz anymore. And it's kasher yanu otoken yirbe yifrod. As much as they were afflicted, they were having more and more children. That's good, and that has its own value. Believe me, it does. But when they themselves realize that they're suffering, okay, when they themselves realize that this is not what it's about, then they realize their deep impoverishment from life fully lived. That's what he saw. Oh, this people has arrived. This people has arrived at some participation in that very first time man and woman were together, and they recognized that they're missing what it's really about. Because if you're a slave, you can't have it because you don't have a life, because you're not real, because you're not authentic, because you're not able to penetrate another, because you're not there. You're just living someone else's life. You get that? And I'll teach you something that the rabbis say, which you need a little halachic background, but not too much to understand. The rabbis say, I'll just put it like in the conclusion. Eved behefkera nechale, the rabbis say. A slave likes promiscuity. A slave likes to be promiscuous. The rabbis actually say, they say this because if you free a slave, you'd think it's a good thing for him. So it has a certain halachic thing. So if it's a good thing for him, then if I give the document of his freeing into someone else's hand, so certainly the slave wants to be freed, and so therefore it's as if I put it in his hand, because if it's something against him, then I have to put it in his hand and he has to express acceptance. But if it's something that's good for him, I could put it into someone else's hand, and of course this person is happy about it. Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We give people ownership even when they're not there to accept it. So they say, and certainly you can give a document of freeing for a slave into someone else's hand, because certainly it's better for him. And the rabbis say, not necessarily. Not every slave wants to be freed. And the answer they give is because he actually likes the promiscuity of his life there, where he can hang out with all these girl slaves and never make a commitment, and never have a self, and never have a relationship, really. Some people like that. Maybe he's like that. I mean, after all, he is a servant. Somehow he was sold into that and has lived that. You see how these things interconnect. And so, as slaves, they were missing derech eretz. We can't be on a journey together, unified by the journey, if I have no agency of my own. Now, not only did God see Onyein, but he saw Amalein. He saw a kind of work which had no realization. Elu habani. These are the children, they say. These are the children. What children is the Amal? Well, they say, Kol haben hayilod hayorot hashlichu b'chol habat techayu. They saw that all of their male sons were being killed. That was the Amal. That was the Amal. It wasn't that they were really getting, pressured on the work and were having to work really hard. No. Amal is when the work, which is your deepest work, which is to bring progeny into the world, on whatever level, whether it's physical, biological with children, or whether it's a creative output, depending on who you are in your life. I'm living through them. I'm living my life extending beyond myself through them. It could be a piece of art. It could be a child. My extended life is being truncated. That's Amal. Okay? It's being truncated. It's just pain. It's not production. We'll leave that there, right there. And then the final one is Vet Lachatzein. This is, I think, is one of the most interesting ones. But just wait, remember Abraham? So Abraham is the great broad visionary of including all in the one, right? That's Abraham. That's Onyenu is when that's lost. Lech Lecha, he starts with going on a journey towards the single source, right? They didn't have that. That was Vayar Donyenu. Vayar et Amalenu, our labor, our work. They weren't in the service of anything beyond themselves, because whatever they would produce beyond themselves was killed off. That's Yitzchak, who was the patriarch of service. Okay, sacrifice. I'm willing to sacrifice if it's something bigger, but if I'm sacrificing and there's nothing there, just keep killing the kid, keep killing the production. That's Amalenu. Okay, so he's looking at their love of life, that they will no longer be countenance this. They will no longer accept this, okay, because they've discovered themselves. And then finally, Ved Lachatzein. Ved Lachatzein. A long time ago, we talked about long time. We talked about Yaakov, remember, as the patient one. Remember Yaakov, the patient one, as opposed to Esav, who's got to travel fast. Lachatzeinu, the rabbis say, isn't that they were pushing them down like this. Zoha dechak. Dechak means pushing them. Never enough time. There's never enough time. Docheket haketz, the rabbi says, when you try to push salvation before it's time. Or docheket hasha'ah, when you try to push the moment. There's a moment waiting to come in your life, and you're trying to push it before it actually arrives. This is the word that they use. Careful of that one. But Zadchak, they were always pushing them. They're always pushing them. Do you understand what happens when you're being pushed all the time? You can never savor what is. You can never actually participate in a true journey, because you're always being pushed ahead rather than experiencing what you're meant to experience here and now. They would push them. Sorry, get going. There's not enough time. There's not enough time. No time. No time. Right? It's actually the inversion of Vayaret Onyenu. If you remember, the Ona is a special time. O Inu is when it's not a special time. It's just painful because there's nothing happening between us. The Lachatzenu is the Dechak. They're pushing it all the time. No time. No time means no true meeting. No true meeting. No true meeting. No time means no true fruition. No possibility. Just get to the point. Would you just put those bricks up there already? I was trying to make it look like, get out of here. Just put it up there. Oh my gosh, someone's falling off the rafters. Don't worry about it. Get those bricks up there. There's no time for your humanness, which is always a product of an organic growth. No time. And I'll tell you something also that the rabbis teach. When it comes to the sexual encounter, you always have to give it time. You always have to give it time. That's also another reason why it's called Ona. You always have to give it time. The rabbis actually teach this in the Talmud, where they say that a person who's an Amaretz, who's just a person of the earth without having Derech Eretz, he's just Am Eretz, not Derech Eretz. So he goes really fast with his wife. Just goes fast, and the heck with her. I have my things I need. He's not interested in da'at, in knowing anything here, just getting it done. He's under pressure. And the rabbis actually say, Atz raglayim choteh. He's a sinner if he goes too fast. As opposed to a Talmid Chacham always gives time. Because a Talmid Chacham knows that the deeper insights only emerge over time. They really do. They only emerge over time. They only emerge over and by virtue of patience and letting things come to where they are to come to. So there are actually halachot about this, about how you are with your wife. It's like, yeah, but the Egyptians didn't allow for it. It's all the same subject here, you see. The Egyptians didn't allow for that. They didn't allow for the relationship to truly be one of knowing, which always takes time. Just does. That's just the way the world is built, because you yourself need to enter into it by virtue of the myriad changes you go through, so that the wholeness of you is there, as opposed to just say the physical lust or just the intellect. It could go either way, right? Well, you got the idea. Thank you. Moving on. What do you mean you got the idea? What does your heart feel? Get out of here, man. I got the idea. I have this all the time because I do couples therapy. Like, so I'll try to get them, like there's this reflective listening, etc. Or I call it echoing listening. But anyhow, whatever. So like, so the woman will like speak out a whole thing about her feelings and what she went through and this and that. So, and then the guy will often say, by the way, women do this also. It's not just a gender thing, but the guy will say, oh, so I guess what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. And he got the point. He got the point, but he didn't get the person. The person, she felt this, and she struggled with that, and she thought about this, and then she got, you know what I mean? It's like that takes time. The Egyptians are always saying no time. In saying no time, there can be no knowing. And there not being any knowing, there cannot be any journey and path together. And God saw this. He saw that they sought to be real, alive, authentic. Oh my gosh, I'm remembering Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov now as I see this. They were the great teachers to the planet of these three opposites, right? Who they were. There's an ethos here of life in this, an ethos of what it means to be a truly liberated human being, an ethos of what it means to be a Ben Chori and how it looks when it's realized in living. That's the beauty of this. Am I done?
Thank you.
Questions? Anything you want to bring up? Share? Okay. Actually, I'm leaving for our vacation. Yes, but you want to say something? Go ahead.
So, like, the derech eretz is the internalization of the experience. In a nutshell.
Are you trying to get to a nutshell after what I just said?
No, not a nutshell. But like, no, but like I'm just trying to think, like, because some people
Yeah,
are like,
it's not just.
much...
It's not. No, I think you're certainly in the right direction. Yeah, certainly in the right direction. But I would put it a little bit more broad. Derech Eretz, I wouldn't just make an equation, but I would certainly say that Derech Eretz is not just the exterior.
Right.
Derech Eretz reflects an interiority of those involved in it. Because if you're on a journey, it's really only a journey if you are connected to what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just walking along, It's a journey when there's a hope, a vision. There's something happening between me and where I'm going. There's something happening between me and where I am now, right? That's derech, right? And in fact, the word derech shares a word which we once looked at, and that is the word dar. Derech, right? Derech has the word dar, which means to dwell. It's like, what? I thought derech is moving along on the path. You can't move along on the path unless you know to dwell where you are. Dar cha means where you dwell. Where you dwell, that's a derech. If you are able to dwell where you are, you're on a derech. If you're not able to dwell where you are, so you're just walking along. You see how it's hidden in the Hebrew, this primary and crucial difference. How much are you here? That's how much you are on a derech. How much you are here and there at once, right? How much your being here is yours. And if we already came onto this, I'll tell you something amazing in the Rabbeinu B'Chaye, where God says to Abraham, Kum hitalech ba'aretz. God says to Abraham in chapter 12, I think. Kum hitalech ba'aretz of Bereshit. Lo orka lo rachba, go for it. Hitalech, literally, it's translated usually as walk around the land. To the north, to the south, just walk around the land. So one of the earlier commentators, the Ramban, actually points this out, and the Rabbeinu B'Chaye points it out, and I'm going to go to the Rabbeinu B'Chaye now, says, you don't find that. It doesn't actually say then Avraham went to here and Avraham went to there, and he went up to see Banyas, and then he went down to see Tzfat, and then he went over to see Shechem, and then he went down to see Ashdod. It's like, it doesn't say that he actually walked around. What it does say, though, he says, is that he would come to a certain place and dwell there. So the Rebbeinu B'chai says, God didn't tell him, kum lech ba'aretz. He didn't tell him, go walk in the land. He said, kum hit halech. Now, hit halech is a, man, what's the word? When it's about you, happening inside you.
Reflexive.
Reflexive, thank you. Wow, look at that. Reflexive, correct. It's about you. How can you walk about you? What does that mean? So he says a most amazing thing. He says, that's why it says wherever when he dwelled, he sat down there. Because hithalchut is not lalechet. Hithalchut, it says, the Rebbeinu B'chai says, it says that about tzaddikim, like Enoch, like Chanoch, like Noach. They were mithalech. What does mithalech mean? That they contemplate deeply the ever-changing universe and ascend to the heights of the higher insights. Lasig hasagot elionot. That's, he says, that's what God wanted. That you should, and this is the beautiful thing, that you should go to different places, yes, physically go to different places, and then sit in that place and let what its particular opening and aperture is to higher vision is available to you specifically there. It's different in Sfat than it is in Beersheba, and it's different in the Golan than it is in Jerusalem. You've got to go to those places and experience the depths of an ever unfolding universe, which is God's ever unfolding enlightenment that He's giving us, and connect to that. But it's different in each place. It's physical in terms of your location. It's, so to speak, non-physical in that you're going into a deeper and deeper consciousness, which is silly to say physical and non-physical. It's just consciousness in different forms. That's all. So when you're mithalech, you're in touch with that. I didn't want him walking all over the place for the sake of walking all over the place. Okay? That's when you're on a derech. You see, you learn how to be dar where you are and yet to keep moving. You learn how to really be present with this woman and keep moving. You learn how to be present with yourself and keep moving. Wait a minute, isn't that a contradiction? I mean, if I'm with myself, that means I'm here and now, and that's all. It's the end of it, right? You're just telling me to quiet down, right? I'm telling you to quiet down because I have a profound faith that you are made of God, and God is always expanding, opening, and enlightening. So when you quiet down, you'll get in touch with that. That's a true derech. And in derech eretz, the nexus between the inner and the outer is meant to be whole. And can be. L'chaim.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye. Now.